Northern Syria border disputed. And ChatGPT has written our intro for this. So let's get after it. What has been Russia's role on the northern border of Syria is the first question that I asked ChatGPT. Responded, Russia's played a significant role in the northern border of Syria, particularly in the ongoing Syrian conflict. Since 2015, Russia's been one of the key supporters of... Let's see if I can make this a bit bigger without having to scroll sideways. Since 2015, Russia has been one of the key supporters of the Syrian government in the conflict, providing military, economic, and diplomatic assistance to President Bashar al-Assad's regime. In the northern border region of Syria, Russia has been involved in various ways. For example, in 2019, Russia and Turkey reached a deal to establish a demilitarized zone in the province of Idlib. Russia and Turkey reached a deal on Syrian land, it says here. Which borders Turkey. The deal aimed to prevent a potential military operation by the Syrian government forces and their allies against the opposition-held region, which could have triggered a humanitarian crisis and a new wave of refugees. Moreover, Russia's been working closely with the Syrian government to reclaim control over territories held by various opposition groups, including those on the northern border. In 2018, Russia-backed Syrian forces recaptured the city of Afrin from Kurdish forces, which was previously controlled by the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. Furthermore, Russia has been involved in negotiations between the Syrian government and Kurdish forces, which control several areas on the northern border. Russia sought to facilitate a peaceful resolution to the conflict between the two sides, which has been ongoing since the Syrian government withdrew from the region in 2012. Overall, Russia's role on the northern border of Syria has been complex and multifaceted, as it's been working to balance its interests. Next, I asked, please give further detail regarding the control of border crossings, like but not limited to Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa. The Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa border crossings are two of the main crossings on the northern border of Syria. These crossings have been of great strategic importance for various actors in the Syrian conflict, including the Syrian government, opposition groups, and international aid organizations. During the early stages of the Syrian conflict, the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings were controlled by the Syrian government. However, as the conflict intensified, various opposition groups gained control of the crossings, allowing them to smuggle weapons, supplies, and fighters into Syria from Turkey. These crossings also became important for the delivery of humanitarian aid to opposition-held areas. In 2016, the Syrian government, with the support of, and I stopped. Before going further, let me reword that. Please give further detail regarding, but not limited to, Russia's role in the control of border crossings. Like, but not limited to, Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa. Sure, I apologize for misunderstanding your question earlier, it says. Regarding Russia's role in the control of border crossings like Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa, it's important to note that Russia has been supportive of the Syrian government's efforts to regain control of these crossings. So Russia is supporting Syria here. The Syrian government has sought to reassert control over these crossings, to control the smuggling of weapons and supplies to opposition forces, and to limit the flow of foreign fighters into Syria. Yeah, so this idea that someone other than Russia is controlling these, maybe the UN. In 2020, the Syrian government, with the backing of Russian forces, launched a major military campaign to retake the Idlib province, which includes Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa. The campaign was successful in recapturing several strategic towns and villages, including Sarakeb, which is located on the M5 highway that connects Damascus to Aleppo and which runs through Bab al-Hawa. So Bab al-Hawa runs through Sarakeb. As part of the campaign, the Syrian government sought to regain control over the Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is a key transit point for humanitarian aid and supplies coming into opposition-held areas of Syria from Turkey. The crossing is under the control of the opposition-backed Syrian Salvation Government, which has been accused by the Syrian government and its allies of misappropriating aid and funds intended for civilians. While the Syrian government and Russia have not yet succeeded in retaking Bab al-Hawa, their campaign has put pressure on the opposition forces controlling the crossing, and it remains a key objective for the Syrian government and its allies. So, to say that it's controlled by opposition forces means that it's controlled by Turkey for the most part. Everything that is not controlled by Russia and, in effect, Syria, the Syrian government backed by Russia, is controlled by, it's said, opposition forces or terrorists, or use some derogatory term, but it's actually the puppets of Turkey. However, the situation at the border remains fluid, and it's possible that the control of the crossing could shift again in the future depending on the dynamics of the conflict. This is great, thank you. Please detail this border issue from the perspective of the SSG. It mentioned the Syrian Salvation Government earlier. It's a political entity formed by opposition groups in Syria's northwestern Idlib province in 2017. You could substitute Turkey for opposition groups, actually, it seems at this point. I mean, maybe not all of them are Turkey supported, but the ones that in this area that are being referenced to, including HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Shams, seem to be backed by Turkey. The SSG operates in opposition-held areas and seeks to provide governance and service to the population in those areas. This group's been backed by Turkey and has been instrumental in providing aid and assistance to civilians affected by the conflict. The Bab al-Hawa border crossing has been under the control of the SSG since 2015, and the group has used the crossing to import humanitarian aid, medical supplies, and other goods into opposition-held areas. The SSG has accused the Syrian government and its allies, including Russia, of attempting to seize control of the crossing, to cut off aid to opposition-held areas, and weaken the opposition.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
The SSG has been vocal in its opposition to the Syrian government's military campaign to retake the Idlib province, which has been ongoing since 2020. The group has accused the Syrian government and Russia of targeting civilians and using indiscriminate forces in their military options. The SSG has also accused the Syrian government of seeking to use the humanitarian crisis in the region as a weapon of war by blocking aid deliveries to opposition-held areas. The SSG has been critical of the United Nations for its role in facilitating cross-border aid deliveries through the Bab al-Hawa crossing in 2021. The UN Security Council voted to reduce the number of aid access points from 4 to 2, with the Bab al-Hawa crossing remain one of the 2 access points. The SSG has argued that the reduction in aid access points would lead to a humanitarian catastrophe in opposition-held areas, and has called on the international community to support its efforts to maintain control of the crossing. Overall, from the perspective of the SSG, control of the Bab al-Hawa crossing is crucial for providing aid and assistance to civilians in opposition-held areas, and any attempt to seize control of the crossing would be seen as an attempt to weaken the opposition and worsen the humanitarian crisis. So how is the common popular sentiment of opening the border crossings for aid, etc., not identical to the position of the SSG? In a sense, and this is probably dangerous for the Russian government and other governments in the area who don't want to see Turkey and the SSG in control, it probably is not really positive for the rest of the world to know that, but that seems to be the truth, that the rest of the world is in alignment with the SSG here. Besides Bab al-Hawa, what was the other access point at the Security Council allowed? There was a mention up here about Bab al-Hawa being one of the 2 access points, and Bab al-Salam is the other. The access point that the UN Security Council allowed for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria in 2021, in addition to Bab al-Hawa, is the Bab al-Salam crossing on the Turkish-Syrian border. I wish that ChatG pretext would find some way to make those connections. The question that I asked earlier was in reference to Bab al-Hawa and Bab al-Salam, and then it didn't give that information in the answer. It just gave it explained how Bab al-Hawa played a role in it significantly, but forgot to mention Bab al-Salam. Maybe forgot, I don't know if that's the correct answer. But Bab al-Salam, or the correct terminology, Bab al-Salam is located to the east of Bab al-Hawa, it says here, near the city of Azaz, and it was under the control of the opposition groups until 2016, when it was recaptured by the Syrian government forces with the support of Russia. The crossing has since been reopened and serves as a transit point for humanitarian and commercial goods coming into Syria from Turkey. The Bab al-Salam crossing has been seen as a less critical access point for aid deliveries compared to Bab al-Hawa, as it's located further from the conflict zone. It's been subject to restrictions on the types of goods that can be transported across the border. Nonetheless, the UN has used the crossing to deliver aid and assistance to civilians in need in opposition-held areas, and its continued operation has been seen as important for maintaining some level of humanitarian access into Syria. The next question I asked was, what 4 access points were accessible before 2021? Please detail the UN Security Council voting to reduce the number of aid access points from 4 to 2. And it says, before 2021, there were 4 border crossings that the UN had been authorized to use for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria. In addition to the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings, the other 2 crossings were al-Yarubiyah. The crossing is on the Syria-Iraq border, and it's been used to deliver aid into northeast Syria. And it was under the control of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces and had been authorized by the UN Security Council in 2014. This is really pro-UN, if I'm not mistaken. And then Al-Ramtha, crossing on the Syrian-Jordan border, and had been used to deliver aid into southern Syria. It was authorized by UN Security Council in 2014 as well. However, in 2020, Russia and China vetoed a proposal to renew the mandate for cross-border aid deliveries through both the Al-Yarubiyah and Al-Ramtha crossings, leaving only the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings as access points for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria. Then in July 2021, the UN Security Council voted to renew the mandate for cross-border and deliveries into Syria, but with a reduced number of access points. As a result of the vote, the mandate was extended for another year until July 2022, but only the Bab al-Salam and Bab al-Hawa crossings were authorized for cross-border aid deliveries. So the UN is in control of these. The UN Security Council is in control of these by way of, there have been some dissenting votes by a couple of countries, mainly the ones that we're discussing here. The decision to reduce the number of access points was a contentious one, with some countries arguing that it would limit humanitarian access to Syria and worsen the humanitarian crisis in the country. So the UN, for the most part, was probably pro having these border crossings open, but others, including Russia, argue that the situation in Syria has improved and that the Syrian government should be given greater control over aid deliveries into the country. Ultimately, the decision to reduce the number of access points was seen as a compromise that allowed for some level of cross-border aid deliveries to continue, while also taking into account the concerns of those who argued for greater control over aid deliveries by the Syrian government. So that happened in July 2021, so it's been almost 2 years since that. That's a pivotal point, especially relative to where we are now with Syria having aid be the priority at this moment. The SSG is backed by Turkey and the Syrian government is backed by Russia. This is the question. And ChatG pretext answers, yes, that's correct. The Syrian opposition, including the SSG Syrian Salvation Government, is primarily backed by Turkey, which has provided military and other support to opposition groups fighting against the Syrian government. Turkey's been involved in the Syrian conflict since 2011 and has supported various opposition groups in their fight against the Syrian government. On the other hand, the Syrian government is backed by Russia, which has been its key ally in the conflict. Since 2015, Russia has provided military support to the Syrian government, including air support, which has helped the government regain territory from opposition groups. It's worth noting that it's ChatG pretext there. Have Turkey and Russia considered any negotiations? This is my question. Have Turkey and Russia considered any negotiations or had any discussions regarding this issue? Yes, ChatGPT responds. Turkey and Russia have been involved in negotiations and discussions regarding the situation in Syria.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
Turkey and Russia support opposing sides in the conflict, yet they've sought to cooperate on certain issues in order to reduce tensions and help bring an end to the conflict. In March 2020, for example, Turkey and Russia reached an agreement to establish a ceasefire in the northwestern Syria province of Idlib, which had been the scene of intense fighting between Turkish-backed opposition forces and the Syrian government forces backed by Russia. The ceasefire helped to reduce the level of violence in the area and avert a potentially catastrophic humanitarian crisis. In addition, Turkey and Russia have been involved in negotiations regarding the Bab al-Hawa crossing, which is the key access point for cross-border aid deliveries into Syria. And we'll have some footage on Bab al-Hawa a little later. In June 2021, Turkish and Russian officials held talks to discuss the future of the crossing amid concerns that its closure could worsen the humanitarian situation in Syria. While the talks did not result in a resolution to the issue, they signaled that both Turkey and Russia recognize the importance of humanitarian access to Syria and are willing to engage in a dialogue to address the issue. Overall, while Turkey and Russia have different interests and priorities in Syria, they've recognized the need to work together on certain issues in order to help resolve the conflict, says ChatG pretext. Yeah, but there's the background, and here are a few articles related. This is just a few hours ago, 12 hours ago. Earthquake aid enters Syria. Opposition runs through new route. UN trucks carrying essential humanitarian assistance, including shelter materials, mattresses, blankets, and carpets, enter northwestern Syria through Bab al-Salam border point between Turkiye and Syria. An aid convoy has passed through a newly reopened border crossing into opposition-run northwestern Syria, where help has been slow to arrive since last week's earthquake, which killed more than 41,000 people in both Turkey and Syria. A caravan of 11 United Nations trucks entered Syria through the reopened Bab al-Salam border point on Tuesday after Bashar al-Assad's regime agreed to let the world body use the crossing for aid. Before the earthquake struck, almost all the crucial humanitarian aid for more than 40 million people living in opposition-controlled areas of northwest Syria was being delivered through just one crossing from Turkey, Bab al-Hawa. Ankara had offered to the international community that it can open 2 border crossings in the southern Kilis province for the delivery of humanitarian aid to Syria. Turkey's Foreign Minister Cavusoglu said on Monday. The trucks were loaded with essential humanitarian assistance, including materials, mattresses, blankets, carpets. Paul Dillon, a spokesperson for the UN International Organization for Migration, told the AFP news agency. Activities and local emergency teams have decried the UN's slow response to the quake in the areas, contrasting it with the plane loads of humanitarian aid delivered to regime-controlled airports. The U.S., which refuses ties with Damascus, called on both the regime and the opposition to work to allow an aid. Everyone should put aside their agendas and affiliations in service of one pursuit, and one pursuit only, and that's addressing the humanitarian emergency, the humanitarian nightmare that's unfolding in parts of northwest Syria, State Department spokesperson Ned Price told reporters in Washington. That's 3 Ned Price mentions there. Maybe we'll do a deep dive on Ned Price. The UN also launched an appeal for $397 million to cover 3 months of life-saving relief for victims in Syria, and it was close to a similar plan for Turkiye. Millions of people across the region are struggling for survival, homeless, and in freezing temperatures, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said. Here's a short from the MediaLine.org. Unable to cross, only death despair in Syrian-Turkish border. This is with video. I'll read through the article first here. You get to see a bit of Bab al-Hawa. Following the earthquake, many Syrian refugees in rebel-held Idlib province have not received any aid or help from the outside world. The situation at the Bab al-Hawa border crossing between Turkey and rebel-controlled Idlib government in Syria is particularly dire, following the massive twin earthquakes that hit in the early hours of Monday morning. Speaking exclusively to the media line from the crossing activist and aid worker Abdulkafi Alhamdo said no aid was getting across. The situation at the border here is unbelievable. The roads are open, but they're not allowing any aid to cross, only dead bodies, he says via WhatsApp. The situation here is chaos. So this is 2 days ago. It may have changed since then, but this is in relation to when only bodies were being allowed through Bab al-Hawa. According to the UN, only one convoy of 6 vehicles carrying aid has managed to cross the border into northwestern Syria since the first 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck. The convoys barely made a dent in the relief and search and rescue operations going on in Idlib. What's happened in Syria since the start of the earthquake is indescribable. Syria and Idlib cannot survive this kind of catastrophe. We're already living in a state of war, and the UN's not doing anything at the moment, the father of 2 says. According to Alhamdo, who's the project coordinator for I Still Rise, a local charity that runs various education and relief programs in Idlib, no official aid came across the border between Idlib and Turkey in the first critical 48 to 72 hours. I've been here at Bab al-Hawa crossing since the start, and you can see the roads are open and not destroyed, but the only vehicles coming from Turkey are those carrying dead Syrian brothers, he describes. Why is it that just the dead are allowed to cross? We need aid, we need search and rescue teams, we need help. Syria since 2012 has been in a state of civil war during which over 500,000 Syrians have died and a further 13 million have been displaced. The humanitarian situation was particularly acute in Idlib, the last area that's not under control of the Assad government, which is still having much of its infrastructure and buildings bombed regularly by regime and Russian airstrikes. On top of this, many who had fled the conflict and the Assad regime have temporarily settled in Idlib and have little shelter and cover from the bitter winter weather. So this is from the perspective possibly of Turkey, but at least from the perspective of people who want Bab al-Hawa open, and possibly even from the perspective of the so-called opposition forces of the Syrian government. Over half the population, around 2.8 million people who were internally displaced in Syria, came to Idlib out of a population of just over 4 million. Emmanuel Massart, the Middle East Operations Officer from Medicine Sans Frontiers, Doctors Without Borders, explains to us, adding, and that figure, the people internally displaced in Syria, is only likely to increase following the earthquake on Monday. MSF, which has been one of the few international charities that have been operating in Idlib since the start of the civil war in Syria, said the closure of the border crossing had not affected them yet, but could in the future. So far, we've not tried to cross, but we and our staff and facilities have been operating and in overdrive since the earthquake struck. Massart explains, adding, we're seeing a lot of injuries from the rubble, and also now the cold weather conditions are making matters worse. MSF has in Idlib 7 hospitals and over a dozen clinics, facilities that have been under significant strain and pressure since the earthquake struck. Because we're operating in Idlib for the past 10 years, our teams have been able to react very quickly. But what we're finding now is that because of the level of destruction, a lot of our partner organizations need help too. The international charity, despite having a highly experienced staff, stresses that working in a war zone that's now been hit by one of the strongest earthquakes in the past century is putting a strain on its teams on the ground. There definitely will be a psychological impact on staff. They were dealing with war in Idlib and Syria for 10 years before, and this earthquake is only going to add to that, Emmanuel states. Along the Turkish border are a host of small villages and refugee camps, hosting and supporting internationally displaced persons who have fled the conflict elsewhere. One of the villages that I Still Rise gained access to in the first 24 to 48 hours was near the town of Reyhanli, just west of Bab al-Hawa crossing. I went out to see if I could help there and saw a sea of destruction, hundreds of houses destroyed, Alhamdo explains, adding, my colleague and I went to the village of Reyhanli that crosses the Turkish border. We found this body, Haydar, whose family had survived, but most of his school friends who were trapped under the rubble later died. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Thursday urged the Security Council to authorize the opening of new cross-border humanitarian aid points between Turkey and Syria to deliver UN aid to earthquake victims. Some 4 million people living in the rebel-held areas of northwest Syria have been relying on humanitarian aid transported via the Bab al-Hawa crossing as part of a cross-border aid operation authorized by the UN Security Council nearly a decade ago. But the flow of aid stopped following Monday's 7.8 magnitude earthquake that's killed more than 37,000 people in 2 countries, prompting Guterres to call for more crossings to be authorized. This is the moment of unity. It's not a moment to politicize or to divide, but it's obvious that we need massive support, Guterres told reporters. According to Alhamdo, Haydar and his family had not seen any aid or search and rescue teams since the earthquake struck Reyhanli. The villagers of Reyhanli were in desperate need of help to find and rescue those under the rubble, Alhamdo told us, adding, and we didn't have the equipment to help them. Either we were digging with our hands and trying to reach those buried under the earth. It was awful. Alhamdo, whose I Still Rise charity runs a school project not far from Reyhanli in the town of Adana, region of Idlib, says the voices he heard of those children trapped in the destroyed buildings following the earthquake will haunt him for years to come. This earthquake has affected me psychologically. There's so much death and destruction I saw. I could not escape it, he states, adding, even when I got home and saw my children, I could not smile in front of them. Even though I was thankful they were alive, I'm still hearing these cries and screams in my ears from those people who were trapped under the rubble. Syria's been under Western sanctions since the government's brutal crackdown on protesters in 2011, which spiraled into civil war. Guterres stated that no sanctions would hamper relief efforts. This is a moment in which everybody must make clear that no sanctions of any kind interfere with the relief to the population of Syria in the present moment, Guterres said. Turkiye said on Thursday it was working to open 2 more border crossings with Syria to deliver aid. And here's a bit of video from that border.
Now, as you see here, this is in fact one of the trucks that is carrying many dead people, Syrian people who died in Turkey. Now they are coming into Syria. In fact, the road is open, of course, in front of these dead people, as you see here now. As you can see, these are dead people that are moved now into the Syrian lands. You see? In fact, the road is open, but and there are no logistic problems, in fact, but there are logistic problems in front of the humanitarian aids to keep people alive, as you see now.
All right, a quick story from The Guardian. Syria's Assad, you would presume they would be against Syria and Russia in this article, but who knows. Syria's Assad agrees to open 2 more entry points for aid to earthquake victims. So this is, let's see, Monday, the 13th. UN announces regime leaders' acceptance of border crossing points for humanitarian aid to reach rebel-held province. Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad has agreed to open 2 border crossing points to allow in a greater volume of emergency aid for victims of the earthquake that's devastated parts of Turkey and Syria and killed 36,000 people. Assad's decision was announced and welcomed by the UN Security General Antonio Guterres, who said 2 crossing points between Turkey and northwest Syria, Bab al-Salam and al-Rai, would be open for an initial period of 3 months to allow for the delivery of humanitarian aid. Until Monday, the sole entry point to Syria's rebel-controlled Idlib province had been through Bab al-Hawa border crossing. Previous efforts to open other humanitarian routes had been vetoed by Russia and China, who had claimed such a movement without Assad's consent would undermine the sovereignty of the regime. In Damascus, Guterres announced Assad's change of mind after a closed-door meeting of the UN Security Council on Monday.
We have the evidence. No one can dispute the evidence. We heard the evidence. We saw the evidence.
As the toll of the 6 February earthquake continues to mount, delivering food, health, nutrition, protection, shelter, winter supplies, and other life-saving supplies to all the millions of people affected is of the utmost urgency, Guterres said. Let's take a look at this map. So you have Syria here, Aleppo, and there's Bab al-Hawa. And where's Bab al-Salam? I presume it's up here. And there's Azaz, Aleppo. Turkey's right here. The Turkish toll, opening these crossing points along with facilitating humanitarian access, accelerating visa approvals, and easing travel between hubs will allow more aid to go in faster. The Turkish toll now exceeds 31,643 killed in the quake. Let's see. I'm just looking for information on the borders. Yeah, and then it goes into these ideas about Tahrir al-Sham, who's supported by Turkey, and maybe they just don't want to speak against the Turkish government. Speaking shortly before the announcement of the new additional humanitarian crossing points, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said, "We are a week into this, and every single minute means one more life. The numbers are ticking every single day, so we must act now. It's important that we show the Syrian people that we're there for them, that we're ready to provide for them the assistance they need." Well, I mean, the UN could just that's the thing. And I think that they have just as of recently, but if they haven't, then that's something that we advocate for. And let's go back in history a bit. This is a 2019 document. It's the full text of the Turkey-Russia agreement on northeast Syria. The memorandum of understanding was reached after marathon talks between Erdogan and Putin in Sochi. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have agreed to push back Kurdish forces or fighters from a safe zone along the Turkey-Syria border after marathon talks in Sochi. The meeting on Tuesday centered on the security situation in northeast Syria following the launch of Turkey's cross-border operation on October 9th. This is 2019, aimed at driving the Kurdish People's Protection Units, which Ankara considers terrorists from the area. Below is the memorandum of understanding reached by the two countries, provided to Al Jazeera by the Turkish Foreign Ministry. President of the Republic of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, agreed on the following points. The two sides reiterate their commitment to the preservation of the political unity and territorial integrity of Syria and the protection of national security of Turkey. They emphasize their determination to combat terrorism in all forms and manifestations and to disrupt separatist agendas in the Syrian territory. In this framework, the established status quo in the current Operation Peace Spring area covering Tel Abyad and Ras Al Ain, with a depth of 32 kilometers, will be preserved. Both sides reaffirm the importance of the Adana Agreement. The Russian Federation will facilitate the implementation of the Adana Agreement in the current circumstances. Adana Agreement. Just a moment on that. Okay, so apparently the Adana Agreement is a 1998 agreement regarding the expulsion of the Kurdistan Workers' Party from Syria. So starting at 2019, or starting 12 noon, October 23rd, 2019, Russian military police and Syrian border guards will enter the Syrian side of the Turkish-Syrian border outside the area of Operation Peace Spring to facilitate the removal of YPG elements and their weapons to the depth of 30 kilometers from the Turkish-Syrian border. Which should be finalized in 150 hours. At that moment, joint Russian-Turkish patrols will start in the west and the east of the area of Operation Peace Spring, with a depth of 10 kilometers, 6 miles, except Kamishli city. All YPG elements and their weapons will be removed from Manbij and Tal Rafat. Both sides will take necessary measures to prevent infiltrations of terrorist elements. Joint efforts will be launched to facilitate the return of refugees in safe and voluntary manner. A joint monitoring and verification mechanism will be established to oversee and coordinate the implementation of this memorandum, and the two sides will continue to work to find a lasting political solution to the Syrian conflict with the Astani mechanism, and will support the activity of the Constitutional Committee. And here's another article. This is from yesterday, and it's Al Jazeera's earthquake aid reaches northwestern Syria via newly opened crossing. 11 trucks carrying humanitarian assistance passed from Turkey to northwestern Syria through the Bab al-Salam crossing, UN says. So we have Bab al-Hawa and Bab al-Salam being used, right? But what about the other two? It's Yarubia and there's one other. An aid convoy has passed through a reopened border crossing into rebel-held northwestern Syria, where help has been slow to arrive. And it's this language, you know, it's like, it should not be rebel-held, it should be Turkey-controlled. Should be Turkish-controlled, right? I mean, whether or not Turkey has full control of it over it, you know, it's debatable, just like whether or not Russia has full control over Syria's decisions on the borders. As hopes fade of finding people alive under the debris, more than 200 hours after the 7.8 magnitude quake struck, the focus is switched to providing food and shelter to the vast numbers of survivors. Death toll surpassed 40,000 on Tuesday. The passage marked the first time a United Nations convoy has used the crossing to deliver aid since its closure in 2020. The United Nations closed it, by the way. 11 international organizations for migration trucks carrying humanitarian assistance passed through the Bab al-Salam crossing, the UN said. The crossing had been closed for UN aid since 2020. Another 26 interagency trucks went through the Bab al-Hawa border crossing until now, the only entry point for UN humanitarian aid to directly reach people in opposition-held northwestern. UN cross-border aid is a lifeline, UN humanitarian affairs chief Martin Griffiths wrote on Twitter. The crossing had been closed for UN aid since 2020 under pressure at the UN Security Council from Syrian regime ally Russia, calling instead for all relief for the war-torn country to enter via government-controlled areas. So there we have it, right? The convoy passed through a day after Syrian President Bashar al-Assad agreed to allow UN aid to enter from Turkey via 2 more border crossings, marking a shift for Damascus, which has long opposed cross-border aid deliveries to the rebel enclave. And it's rebel. So Al Jazeera, you know, their lack of impartiality is prevalent here too. and the delay in opening new crossings stalled immediate relief and search and rescue efforts when the time for effective search and rescue is tragically running out, the International Rescue Committee said in a statement. UN launches an appeal. Nearly 9 million people in Syria were affected by the earthquake, the UN said, as it launched a $400 million funding appeal to help the situation. UN Security Council, this is more detail on the aid itself. And Guterres said the UN is in the final stages of preparing an emergency appeal. He urged the international community to provide the emergency funding without delay and the human suffering from this epic natural disaster, and so on. The UN would supply a range of basics but would need assistance. Fears have grown for survivors on both sides of the border, with the UN saying more than 7 million children have been adversely affected. And there we go. Here's another. This is from 2 days ago. Did U.S. pressure force Turkey to let Syrian Kurdish earthquake aid into rebel-held northwest? Ankara relents, allowing the first humanitarian aid and disaster relief to enter devastated northwest Syria from the country's Kurdish-run northeast. The first aid convoys, this is Amberin, this is almonitor.com, by the way. And the first aid convoys from Kurdish-run northwest Syria were allowed to cross into the northwestern part of the country that was leveled by the massive earthquake centered in Turkey. Syrian Kurdish leaders confirmed to Al Monitor Monday, saying that U.S. pressure had likely forced Ankara to cave. The breakthrough followed a week-long standoff between the Kurdish self-described Autonomous Administration of Northeast and East Syria and Turkish-backed Sunni rebel groups.
Let's try and unpack that for a second. Let's try and de-emotionalize this for a second. Let's try and intellectualize this for a second. Let's try and rationalize this for a second.
So the Autonomous Administration of Northeastern Syria, also known as Rojava, and Rojava, I think that means west, actually. It's a de facto autonomous region in northeastern Syria. It consists of several or self-governing subregions, including Afrin, Jazeera, Euphrates, Raqqa, Tabqa, Manbij. The region gained its de facto autonomy in 2012 in the context of the ongoing Rojava conflict and the wider Syrian civil war, in which its official military force, the Syrian Democratic Forces, has taken part. While entertaining some foreign relations, the region's not officially recognized as autonomous by the government of Syria or any state except for the Catalan parliament. Sahih Muslim, co-chair of the Democratic Unity Party, which shares power in the AANES, told Al Monitor that 55 trucks carrying relief supplies collected by the people of Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, and a further 53 trucks containing aid donated by the people of Manbij, who were all governed by the AANES, had crossed via Manbij into 2 Turkish-occupied areas. This is a cool alternate source. I like that, by the way. All right, here's a bit of video on, let's see, the title of this is Syria Quake, Surprising Condemnation Over Al-Assad Approval for Aid Crossings.
Who's in
Forgive me if I skip through any of the portions that aren't related to that.
Deir is one of the hardest hit areas in Syria. So Zaina, more aid is going through opposition controlled areas in Syria with 2 more crossings opening. Tell us about how it's all going to work.
Well, there is desperation on the ground. We are in Jenderes, one of the hardest hit areas in northern Syria. In this town alone, more than 1,100 people were killed. The whole neighborhood now reduced to rubble. People here say that they've lost their family members, neighbors. In this house alone, if you remember that newborn child who was rescued, still attached by the umbilical cord, she's now in hospital, and she lost her whole family. So you have many stories like this here, but unlike in southern Turkiye, here in Syria, you don't see the international rescue teams, you don't see an international aid effort to help the people on the ground. News of the opening of the two border crossings undoubtedly will help the situation on the ground. So far, aid has been trickling in from the Bab al-Hawa crossing. Now the Syrian government says it's going to allow aid to enter from two other crossings from Turkiye. And the international, the community, the United Nations are hoping that their initial response, which really has been criticized as inadequate, will step up. But people here are angry because they're saying, why does the United Nations or the world have to wait for an approval from the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad? As you know, people here do not consider him a legitimate leader, but a brutal dictator who killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people.
And just to pause, we could focus on Bashar al-Assad, but you could also focus on Russia voting with Syria to veto the situation, controlling the 4 border crossings at the UN. So it could be Russia as well, and it could also you could blame UN for the way that they construct the voting, right? That 1 or 2 vetoes can stop something like this. And see how humanitarian is a decision like that.
The course of the war. They were hoping that the international community would just use those routes without his approval. And the fear here is that what Bashar al-Assad is trying to do is gain political legitimacy by showing that he is still in charge. So you have that anger, and at the same time, you also have a lot of frustration. People here feel that they were abandoned by the international community.
Zaina, tell us more about what you've seen, what you've witnessed since arriving inside Syria.
Well, poverty, years of war, displacement camps, really scars of war that haven't been healed. Before the earthquake, people were struggling to survive. After the earthquake, they're still struggling to survive. This is really a forgotten part or a forgotten corner of Syria. People find it difficult to work, to make ends meet. And at the same time, if you look behind me, there's no rescue and search operations ended on day 5. Rescuers had no other choice. They said that we lost countless of lives because we kept on appealing for heavy machinery that never came. Yet across the border in southern Turkey, up to today, day 9, missing survivors are still being found alive and being pulled from the ruins.
Indeed.
So people here feel frustrated, but it's not new. Ever since we've been covering this conflict and visiting these areas, we've heard this time and time again. Those in the opposition feel that the world really never stood by their side, and their greatest fear today is that they believe the Syrian president is capitalizing on this earthquake, engaging with the United Nations, which actually operates in government-controlled areas. And here you don't see any international aid workers on the ground.
I was going to ask you. Yeah, I was going to ask you in those government-controlled areas about the broader rescue efforts across Syria.
Well, yeah, since the aftermath of that earthquake, earthquakes, a number of areas in Syria were affected, among them Aleppo, Latakia, Hama, areas under the control of the government. Many people lost their lives too, and there were hundreds of collapsed buildings as well in those areas. But immediately in the aftermath of the earthquake, we saw planes landing at Damascus airport, Aleppo airport, from a number of countries, even though the Syrian government was blaming what they're calling Western sanctions for preventing aid from landing, but aid was landing. And we have to remember the United Nations, it's different agencies, the UNHCR, UNICEF, WHO, they all have offices in government-controlled areas, including the International Committee of the Red Cross. So immediately what we saw were pictures emerging from government areas where people were giving handouts, food, shelter, and that we did not see in the northwest corner of Syria. So the hope here is that the international aid effort will step up. I mean, the United Nations even acknowledged that they failed the Syrian people. The head of the UN aid chief, that is what he said. But
as per our ChatGPT research, etc., the United Nations is in control of that border. The United Nations is in control. They made the decision, albeit, by way of a vote that included vetoes by a minority. They're still in control. They still made the decision.
But I can tell you, people here believe those are just empty words.
Zaina, thank you very much for bringing us.
And here's a short from graydynamics.com. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, a situational assessment. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the last major threat to President Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. This is because of their refusal to engage in any peace talks and their highly organized nature. Due to their steadfast refusal to make peace with Assad's regime, HTS continues to launch attacks on enemy forces. Furthermore, as Turkey abandons rebel groups they previously backed, these fighters will likely fall under the HTS umbrella. In addition, with Turkey increasingly worsening relations over various issues with other NATO members, it's unlikely that the U.S. will help them by striking at HTS. And here's an article from yesterday. RepublicWorld.com is the site, and the headline is Syrian rebel leader with links to Al-Qaeda seeks help for earthquake-ravaged Idlib. And we could think of this as Russian propaganda. A Syrian rebel leader, just a moment. A Syrian rebel leader with links to Al-Qaeda is calling on the international community to help the last remaining rebels-controlled areas in Syria recover from the earthquake. I'm going to stop using the term rebel here. The leader, identified as Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, known by his nom de guerre, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, appealed for international aid to help people in the quake-hit northwestern province of Idlib, Syria, The Guardian reported. The plea from the leader came a week after, a series of massive earthquakes jolted Syria and Turkey, leading to the death of over 36,000 people in the region. While the government-held area of Syria did manage to get aid from both the international community and the Syrian government, the plight of the people of the northwestern region remained mostly neglected, The Guardian reported. The leader, who has a whopping $10 million U.S. government bounty on his head, urged the United Nations to understand the gravity of the situation in the northwestern region. The United Nations needs to understand that it's required to help in a crisis, al-Jalani told The Guardian. From the first hour of the earthquake, we sent messages to the United Nations asking for aid. Unfortunately, no support for our search and rescue teams arrived, as well as no specific aid to combat the crisis. When it comes to the allocation of humanitarian aid in Syria, there had been a political tussle between several international actors. the Syrian rebel group, and the Bashar al-Assad administration. While it was earlier reported that the Syrian government is willing to help the northwestern rebel-held region, the Al-Jilani said that the Assad regime cannot be trusted. Who is Abu Muhammad al-Jilani? It was the year 2013 when Jilani was officially designated as terrorist by the U.S. government. The Syria leader was the founder and former leader of Jabhat al-Nusra Front, an al-Qaeda affiliated group in Syria. However, in an effort to reconcile his links with the international actors, he broke off his ties with al-Qaeda and ISIS. According to PBS Frontline, Jilani currently heads the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an anti-Assad Islamist group. According to The Guardian, the Islamist group, which is held by Jilani, played a crucial role in the rescue operations on the northwestern front. The area faced the major wrath of the earthquake, recording over 700 deaths in the region alone. UN admits the negligence. The revelation from Jilani came a day after the United Nations Relief Chief Martin Griffiths admitted that the international community had failed the people of northwest Syria. At the Turkiye-Syria border today, we've so far failed the people in northwest Syria. They rightly feel abandoned, looking for international help that hasn't arrived. My duty and our obligation is to correct this failure as fast as we can. That's my focus now, Griffiths tweeted on Sunday. He then went on to share the visuals of the delivery of UN relief aid to the distressed region. Trucks with UN relief are rolling into northwest Syria. I'm encouraged by the scale-up of convoys from the UN Transshipment Center at the Turkish border. We need to open more access points and get more aid out fast. However, the quake-hit people believe that the help from the international body is too little too late. Leader of the Syrian civil defense group, Raed al-Saleh, said that the senior official's visit to the region was too little too late, the New Arab News reported. Since the moment the earthquake struck 7 days ago, we've been appealing to the UN to send urgent assistance to aid our rescue operations in northwest Syria, al-Saleh said. For days, and that's the thing, they being on the ground, being actually connected to the people, being a part of a de facto government in that area, they know who's limiting what, and maybe from another perspective, we may not see the UN as the culprit here, but it looks as though the UN, by way of Russia and Syria, are the culprit for not allowing those borders to be open. And for days, these calls went unheeded, and during this time, countless lives have been needlessly lost. This visit is too little too late, he added. On Sunday, a Syrian activist shared pictures from the Idlib province where the quake-struck family hoisted the UN flag upside down in an act of protest against the international body. That's powerful. Here's another bit of a blurb on the UN opening 2 borders. Syria opens 2 more borders crossings for humanitarian aid.
Up to date on UN efforts. Rula Amin is back with us. She is Senior Communication Advisor with the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, and she is in Damascus, Syria today. Welcome back, Rula. We spoke to you in the earliest hours after the quake disaster. It's a pleasure to have you back with us today.
Thank you very much, Heather, and thanks for having me. Actually, I just got back from Aleppo, and the scenes we have seen there, the suffering, the pain, what we witnessed is just immense.
Well, can I begin with that? Because I did want to exactly start there. It was quite striking to hear the UN Secretary General speak yesterday and say helping people of Syria is of the utmost urgency. And I was wondering what you've seen and what your teams have seen to lead you to characterize it in that way of utmost urgency. What is the situation on the ground now?
The first thing you see, of course, is the destruction, the building that had collapsed. Then you start seeing people on the streets, in the parks, sleeping in their own cars because either their homes had collapsed or their homes had been weakened by the earthquake and now unsafe and they cannot stay in it. So they choose to stay outside It's very cold. It's freezing temperatures. Many are in collective shelters. It's makeshift shelters, actually, mosques, schools that had been turned into centers where these people can have a roof on top of their heads. More than 200 shelters just in Aleppo city alone. We saw thousands of people who had become homeless and displaced. Again, we met with a lady who had been displaced many times during the past 12 years because of the crisis. She just returned back, and now she lost her home, and now she's homeless again. Really, it was so painful to see them. And beyond the immediate needs, of course, which are huge because they need assistance in shelter, they need food, they need water, they need hygiene, they need medical aid, they need psychosocial support from the trauma that they have been through. All these are immediate needs, but we also saw that this earthquake is going to have a long-term impact on these people. It has destroyed the infrastructure, the water facilities, schools, hospitals, even the sources of clean water are at risk. And that's why our understanding, we're trying to assess what are the priority needs, how can we address it in the fastest way possible, and how can we mobilize resources so we are able to do so.
Short and long term, obviously, that call for an international response. The big development in terms of responding to those significant needs, the word that has just broken that Bashar al-Assad, in discussing with Mr. Griffiths, agreed to open 2 more border crossing points from Turkey into northwestern Syria. So in that part of the country, to the opposition-held territory, there will be more.
And notice they'll use his name first, but then they'll pair it with other people because he's not in control in that sense. If he was in control of that area, then it would not be a disputed area. You know, it would be an area that there wouldn't need to be ceasefires in it. So he's not in control of that area.
More aid getting in. What will the impact of that be, do you think?
Well, that's a very welcome agreement and a welcome gesture. We needed to have more access to Northwest Syria because, you know, there more than 4 million people were dependent on humanitarian aid even before this earthquake hit. And there was only one border crossing allowing the United Nations to bring in aid into Northwest Syria. Now, we had some pre-positioned tents and relief items, and they were disposed and I mean, they were used by the partners on the ground to assist people, but nowhere near enough because the needs are huge, and more than 3 million people were displaced inside that area anyway before the earthquake. Yes. So you can imagine how much needs there were. Now with these 2 border points opening, we are hoping to be able much needed and desperately needed assistance to reach all those who were affected.
Only 52 truckloads of aid into that region so far. So one would expect, as you say, the numbers allowed in will grow considerably. It's interesting, though, I'm not sure if you heard these comments. We've reported a lot on the White Helmets who have been involved in the search and rescue, the civil defense organization that's operating in the Northwest. They heard about the UN deal. Broke was the world the UN to then continue. I'm wondering this morning, soon, from the UN perspective, the moment would come soon to pivot from search and rescue to recovery. I'm wondering this morning, Ms. Amin, from the UN standpoint, has that moment arrived? Is all hope lost, and is it now a matter of recovery?
You know, maybe in theory, people say after 1 week it's hard to find survivors, but I think for the families who have relatives under the rubble, they are still hopeful and they're still trying, even when the official rescue and search teams have stopped. It's hard to tell people to stop hoping. What we are hoping is that the world now, pays attention again to the suffering of the Syrian people for the past 12 years, and maybe even put more concerted effort to end this crisis, to allow them to go back to their homes, to stop being displaced and being so vulnerable. Part of why this earthquake was really shattering to their lives is that they were vulnerable anyway, even before it hit. And they're vulnerable because this country had been in crisis for 12 years. They lost their homes. Many of the hospitals were destroyed, many of the schools, deep economic crisis. The country was divided. It was so hard on them for the past 12 years.
The borders were controlled by people other than the government themselves, and humanitarian aid was not allowed in before the earthquake as well. These are all factors. And maybe she didn't include that the borders were controlled because she's part of the UN, but that's it. It's a huge part.
Paid the highest price. And now I think it's time to think, how can we really not just alleviate their suffering and mitigate it? How can we end it?
Rula, thank you for another conversation. I appreciate it. Senior Communication Advisor with the UNHCR.
Here's another from The Guardian. And notice the biased language here. I'll try my best to edit it. Syrian leader pleads for outside help a week on from earthquakes. This is 2 days ago. Former Al-Nusra Front chief keen to show scale of crisis in Idlib province and play down past links to Al-Qaeda. A Syrian leader with a $10 million U.S. government bounty on his head has appealed for urgent international aid to help the northwest province of Idlib after the earthquakes that have killed thousands and brought the last opposition-controlled area to its knees. And it's very interesting that in a time of despair and division, further divisions are created by way of, pointing out that this person is a rebel and has a bounty on his head, as opposed to just focusing on the situation. It becomes a little bit redundant here. The UN needs to understand that it's required to help in crisis, said Ahmed Hussein al-Shara, better known as Abu Muhammad al-Jalani. Jalani was officially designated, we're not going to go into that. While Washington has lifted sanctions on the earthquake aid to Damascus, a political fight continues between international actors, the administration in northwest Syria and the government of Bashar al-Assad. Some international actors have proposed the reopening of other crossings into northern Syria, notably Bab al-Salam, which leads to areas in the far north of Aleppo province still under control. Many in these areas, including Jalani, say the Assad regime cannot be trusted to deliver aid, and that humanitarian assistance should pass via the northwest and into other areas affected by the quake, which has left an estimated 5.3 million homeless. A UN spokesperson said on Sunday that the aid passing through the opposition-controlled territory has also been held up by HTS. All humanitarian assistance must be permitted to move through all border crossings, the spokesperson for the U.S. National Security Council said on Sunday. As part of the UN, block the border. And finally, you got a tweet from Elijah Manier, a wonderful journalist. For the first time, Saudi Arabia plane landed in Aleppo after 12 years of boycott. Saudi rescue teams and trucks have already been sent to the affected area of West Syria. So we're going to watch this space, and we'll be back with more Al-Aqsa to All News. And remember, your engagement, your like, the share, and the subscribe will propel us at warp speed towards the continuation of our mission to truthfully go where no news will have been going before. Russia and Iran may cancel visas. Russia and Iran may cancel visas for citizens of the two countries. Tehran's waiting for a response from Russian officials, Iranian ambassador to Russia Qasem Jalali said Monday. There's such a prospect. Iran agrees with the abolition of visas between the two countries. They've even taken steps in our country for this issue. We're waiting for the opinion of Russian officials. This is from news.am. If Russia, too, like us, would declare that there's such readiness, we can announce a visa-free regime in a short time, Jalali said at a press conference when asked whether the prospect of achieving a visa-free regime between the two countries this year is now evident. From our side, there is a full readiness for the abolition of visas between our countries. If Russia takes such a decision at the highest level, we can even announce visa-free regime between our countries in 2023 in the coming months, the head of the Iranian diplomatic mission added. And from TehranTimes.com, Iran and Russia one step closer to implementing visa waiver program. Travelers from Iran and Russia can soon benefit from the previously linked visa waiver program, Qasem Jalali said on Tuesday. Iran is currently waiting for the response from Russia regarding the cancellation of visas between Moscow and Tehran in 2023, he explained. In order to kickstart this process, Tehran also proposed to Moscow that visas for businessmen and drivers who play an important role in the trade be revoked, he noted. The agreement was initially signed by former Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin in 2017. Earlier this month, Mayor reported that Russian tourists are increasingly choosing Iran as a vacation destination these days. There's been a surge of Russian tourists in Iran as a result of international sanctions against Russia, the reporter added. Several factors have contributed to Russia's limited domestic and foreign tourism these days, including a recent war with Ukraine that's adversely affected the Russian tourism industry. Travel restrictions to China, sanctions by the European Union, and a negative image of Russia being presented in different countries, and the ban on international cards such as Visa prevent Russia from expanding its tourism. This has prompted Russian tourists to visit Asia and the Middle East instead, especially Iran as a popular tourist destination despite negative advertising. Back in December, an Iranian tourism official announced that Iran's tourism market is still unfamiliar to the majority of potential Russian travelers. Today, Russians mainly travel to destinations such as Dubai and Turkey for tourism, and one of our problems is that the Iranian market is not well known to them. The official expressed hope to reduce the gap by organizing FAM tours, B2B meetings, and forums to be attended by tourism insiders from the two countries. Early in September, tourism insiders and officials from the two countries exchanged views on education, hotel management, holding joint exhibitions and introducing tours and investments, among others. The head of the Iranian Tour Operators Association, Ibrahim Porfaraj, believes the majority of potential Russian travelers are unaware of the vast tourist attractions that exist in every corner of Iran. The fact is that Iran's political and economic relations with Russia are considered as good, but this has nothing to do with attracting tourists because it's directly connected with the Russian people. It's the Russian people who must choose Iran as their destination. Last year, an Iranian travel expert said many Russian tourists were eager to travel to Iran, and Iranian travel expert said on Monday, recounting his Russian counterparts, many potential Russian travelers are motivated to visit novel and lesser-known destinations such as Iran that could be safe and attractive. That could be a safe and attractive destination, said Mustafa Sarvari, who presided over the tourism marketing and advertising office of the Iranian Tour Operators Association. The Islamic Republic expects to reap a bonanza from its numerous tourist spots, such as bazaars, museums, mosques, bridges, bathhouses, madrasas, mausoleums, churches, towers, mansions, of which 26 are inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Amazing. And from TehranTimes.com, February 1st, this is, Russian arrivals in Iran soar in the face of sanctions. There's been a huge surge of Russian tourists in Iran as a result of international sanctions against Russia, Mayor reported on Wednesday. Several factors have contributed to Russia's limited domestic and foreign tourism these days, including a recent war with Ukraine that's adversely affected the Russian tourism industry, travel restrictions to China, sanctions by the European Union, a negative image of Russia being presented in different countries, and the ban on international cards, such as Visa, prevent Russia from expanding its tourism. This has prompted Russian tourists to visit Asia and the Middle East instead, especially Iran. This is due to the visa waiver between Iran and Russia that's increased for Russian tourists visiting Iran. Russia's outbound tourism market was impacted by the coronavirus outbreak until months ago, but it's now growing in its completely new outlook, and Iran remains a popular tourist destination for Russians despite negative advertising. Back in December, an Iranian tourism official announced that Iran's tourism market is still unfamiliar to the majority of potential Russian travelers. Today, Russians mainly travel to destinations such as Dubai and Turkey for tourism, and one of our problems is that the Iranian market is not well known to them. The official expressed hope to reduce the gap by organizing fam tours, B2B meetings, and forums to be attended by tourism insiders from the two countries. And fam tours is slang for a familiarization tour. Early in September, tourism insiders and officials from the two countries exchanged views on education, hotel management, holding joint exhibitions, and introducing tourism events, among other issues. Furthermore, they discussed prospects of visa waiver for tourist groups based on agreement that former Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, inked in 2017. The head of the Iranian Tour Operators Association, Ibrahim Porfaraj, believes the majority of potential Russian travelers are unaware of the vast tourist attractions. We just read something related to that. And at this point, let's go into